Oh, there you go. Good morning, everyone. We're seeing people just trickle in here. We're not getting started for another 3 minutes or so. So you can settle in, grab yourself a glass of water or coffee or tea. We'll get started soon.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Ontario Phragmites Working Group annual meeting. We are absolutely delighted that you're joining us today virtually from wherever you are across the province and maybe beyond. On behalf of Gabby and I just want to welcome you all. And we'd also like to thank very much both Emily and Vicki for their assistance with helping us organize this virtual meeting and all the background work that they've been doing to make this happen and help us facilitate today. So thank you so much. Gabby and I put a lot of thought into this year's meeting agenda. As most of you are aware, there's a really exciting initiative going on in the province with the Phragmites Action Plan, significant funding from the provincial government, and lots of great initiatives happening. And so with that, there are a lot of folks new to the Phragmites scene, and this may be your first meeting, whereas others may, I know, excuse me, have been coming to these meetings since they first began back in 2016. There's just a handful of us, but still hard at it. So we have quite a wide range of folks that with familiarity with Phragmites, and that's really what we're trying to cover with this meeting. Just going back to the basics with looking at the BMP, just highlights of that. We have really great representation from some grassroots organizations that have been doing work for a number of years. And so really delighted that they are partaking in the grassroots panel. We have some information from the City of Toronto how those folks are managing successfully Phragmites in that huge urban center and the challenges that they face and how they've been overcoming them. We have an Indigenous panel as well, and as all of you know, with all the information that's come out the last decade or so with the Truth and Reconciliation, the absolute need to engage First Nations communities in this process wherever we are working. And so I'm really delighted that we have an excellent panel providing information and leading us in that regard. And then we have the information updates on Phragmites control initiatives from Tom Cowan from Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, and Jenny and John from Southwest Zone Parks, all the work they've been doing a decade plus years. I'm going to be providing an update on spray drones. And then we get into the research component, a lot of great information being updated on the BMP and lots of great research being done out of Dr. Rebecca Rooney's lab as well. And then we're going to end with an update on the Ontario Phragmites Action Plan Program update, and then have an open discussion at the end of the day. So a really full day. So I'm just going to pass things over to Gabby to get things started. Thanks, Gabby.
Thanks, Janice, for providing that welcome and overview of what we're going to be chatting about today. My name is Gabby Nichols, and I'm the Programs Manager with the Canadian Council on Invasive Species and OPWG co-chair with Dr. Janice Gilbert. So happy to be here again and be a part of this really great forum that brings so many of us together across Ontario to learn more about Canada's worst invasive species. So I'm going to dive in to just do a bit of some housekeeping as well as thanking our sponsors. So I'll get Vicki to change slides here. First, I want to thank our gold sponsors for this event. So this is the Ontario Phragmites Action Program, which has allowed us to charge lower costs for this year. And they also will be hosting a booth. City of Toronto is also hosting a booth. So both of these sponsors have a booth in the expo floor, which I'll talk about in just a bit when you go to the lobby and during the breaks. I wanted to make a special mention of the Ontario Phragmites Action Program, which definitely supported this event in making it more accessible, especially to those grassroots organizations. The Ontario Phragmites Action Program is an exciting new effort to enhance a coordinated response to invasive Phragmites across Ontario. This program seeks to support and amplify the tremendous momentum Ontario's frag fighting community has built over the last decade. The program has been made possible thanks to an important new investment from Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and is implemented by the Invasive Species Centre, Nature Conservancy of Canada, and a number of other key partners. So big thanks to Ontario Phragmites Action Program. Next slide. For our silver sponsors, we want to recognize Toronto and Region Conservation Authority. They also have a booth, Invasive Species Centre, who has a booth as well. Luschner's Vegetation Management, CPRO, Toronto Region Conservation Authority, Invasive Species Centre, and CPRO all have sponsorship booths. And again, we encourage you to check those out during the break. For the next slide, our bronze sponsors, we have BASF and Corteva Agriscience. Thanks so much. For our friend sponsors, we have York Region and Pristine Property. So thanks very much for all the support of our many sponsors. We really appreciate that. Thank you. And I just wanted to go through a little bit of housekeeping and just what you can expect with using Zoom events for those who aren't familiar. So I've mentioned it a few times, but there's an expo floor that you can access in the lobby when we go to our breaks. We're going to have a lunch break that's about, I think, 30 minutes in the agenda, 30 to 40 minutes. So that is a great time to go and visit some of these sponsors and chat with the booth hosts at those tables. You can click to the expo floor at your top right bar and kind of choose which sponsor you might want to talk to or visit them all. Some other housekeeping I wanted to mention. Those of you who are familiar with Zoom webinar, you'll know that there's a Q&A button as well as a chat button. We really encourage you to, when you're asking speaker questions, to use the Q&A, not the chat. In the Q&A, you're able to upvote some of those questions. So if you like a particular question and want that to be answered, you can click an upvote button to get that to the top and have that answered sooner. For any tech issues, please reach out to Emily Mitchell. You can do that in the chat, but I'm sure through many emails you've received, you have her email as well. So Emily Mitchell with the Ontario Invasive Plant Council is there supporting logistics in the background. Thanks, Emily. I also wanted to mention this event will be recorded and be put on YouTube 10 days following the event, just giving us time to sort of make sure the recordings are all up to snuff and get those online, so it'll be available to anyone to review in case you had to step away or miss something, or you just want to check back in with it. So those are our housekeeping notes for today, but with that, I'm going to pass it over to Vicki Simkovic with the Ontario Invasive Plant Council to provide a bit of an update and overview of the work going on at the council. Thanks, Vicki.
Thanks very much, Gabby, and good morning, everyone. So today I'll provide a brief update on the OIPC. So it's a bit of a repeat from the conference from OIPC, if you were there last week. So the OIPC is a nonprofit organization, and we're now a chapter under the Canadian Council on Invasive Species. This is our list of board members, and many of them are here today. And I also wanted to put up a slide of their logos of all the different organizations they represent, from a range of federal and provincial agencies, municipalities, conservation authorities, and non-government organizations. So together, our network provides a strong network for coordinated action. And over the past year, these are the following members who resigned. So we wanted to thank them for their dedication and valuable contributions over the years. So next, I wanted to go over some of the projects we accomplished over the past year. So in 2024, we completed 5 BMPs: Japanese barberry, burdock, Manitoba maple, oriental bittersweet, and winged euonymus. These BMPs are now available to download on our website, in addition to a total of 27 BMPs. The research and completion of these documents was made possible by the financial support of Environment and Climate Change Canada and City of Toronto. We also wanted to send a special thanks to our network of experts who provided input and reviewed these new documents. And coming up this year, we're excited to have 2 new BMPs that will be in progress, funded by the City of Toronto. So Tree of Heaven, and that's going to have a section on spotted lanternfly, and the periwinkle BMP. And then we've been undergoing a major update with our technical bulletins in terms of some of the chemical control sections. And so they're going to be reposted gradually on our website. Common bird buckthorn is now available on our website. Japanese knotweed is in progress, and others will follow as well through the year. In the next few slides, I wanted to review some projects that OIPC was involved with green shovels in 2023 and 2024. So during last year's OPWG annual meeting, we hosted a half-hour session titled First Nations Engagement, Knowledge and Perspectives, with a presentation entitled Balancing Interference and Stewardship, Learning from Our Relations about How We Govern Our Actions in a Changing Environment. The panelists were Kathleen Ryan, Director of Strategic Partnerships and Initiatives, and Emily Mansour, Manager for the Coastal Waters Monitoring Program. From this meeting, reflections, follow-ups, and next steps were proposed. And then we also hosted a 2-part training session in collaboration with the Green Shovels partners to complement the release of the Phragmites guidebook. So this training took place on March 6th and 7th with the goal of providing key information that goes into creating a Phragmites management plan. We also coordinated the update of our Phragmites BMP and the technical bulletin. So some of the major updates were to the relevant legislation, aquatic herbicides, and biological control. And you'll hear Gabby going through a little bit more about the BMP in just a little bit. And then some upcoming projects for this year. We're currently working on updating and publishing an aquatic plant Invasive Plant Best Management Practice Guide, which we're excited about. It includes an overview of 22 aquatic invasive species, and we're also working on a communications campaign on invasive Phragmites, working in collaboration with other partners. In 2024, we continued to host workshops and educational programs based on our library of best management practices. Our series began with an introduction to Grow Me Instead, which was a really well-attended webinar. We had over 500 people register and 200 attendees. So it's a very popular topic, and it's really exciting to see the engagement. Our workshops are aimed at a basic introductory level for gardeners and homeowners, and we continue to do more in-depth educational programs for municipalities and conservation authorities. Last year, we also did the first Fraggers Forum, which was in April. So it was more of a casual, informal, virtual forum that allowed participants to learn from and engage with fellow scientists, managers, and enthusiasts to talk about the topic of Phragmites management. So we had four individuals who started their own management groups within their community, and they provided their perspectives, how they got started, how they overcame challenges. So it was a really great opportunity to discuss topics and share ideas. And we're hoping to do another one this year. Next, we have 2 active committees for the OIPC. So we have the Ontario Phragmites Working Group, co-chaired by Janice and Gabby, and also the Horticultural Outreach Collaborative, which is co-chaired by myself and Colin. So that one's focused on the horticultural pathway of spread. And OIPC has an excellent track record of delivering high quality work. We're a small but mighty team, and we have a rich library of resources and contacts. Here are some of the services we offer, from technical research and report writing, such as BMP and technical guides, best management practices for specific industry sectors, such as the clean equipment protocol, municipal invasive plant management strategies, various types of training, customized training, and webinars based on our best management practices, and any organizational support. So feel free to contact our team, Brandon, Emily, or myself, if you're interested in how OIPC can help your organization, and if you have any ideas, suggestions, or needs. And with that, I'll pass things back to Gabby.
Excellent. That was such a great way to start our conference, and so many great teachings there. So thanks again for Mary Lou for joining us today. We're going to dive into our next part of the agenda, our first presentation. And we really felt, because there's some new attendees, likely some new to Phragmites attendees, that we'd like to provide a bit of an overview of the best management practices from the Ontario Invasive Plant Council on Phragmites. So I'll be presenting a bit of an overview. As I mentioned, I work with the Canadian Council on Invasive Species, who is connected very closely with the Ontario Invasive Plant Council. The Ontario Invasive Plant Council is our Ontario chapter. And previous to my role with the Canadian Council, I worked with the Ontario Invasive Plant Council and led the 2020 update of the BMP. So I am just going to share that, but that in mind, it also has been 5 years. So at the end, when we do have about 10 minutes left for questions, I'm going to be inviting Janice and Vicki up just to support to respond to any sort of technical questions. Just give me a minute while I put my screen up. Right. Vicki or Janice, if you can just let me know if that looks okay.
Yep, looks good.
Great, thanks so much. All right, so as I said, I'm going to be doing a bit of overview of the invasive Phragmites best management practices. The document is available on the Ontario Invasive Plant Council website for free for anyone to download. So I definitely encourage you to check that out. The website's just there, along with many other best management practices for different invasive species. Really great resource. It's very thorough, so I'll be going through it at a very high level today and focusing a bit more on the sort of management, but there's a lot to it, including information on species at risk, monitoring, pre and post surveys, all sorts of things. But with that, I'll dive right in. So many of us are aware of invasive Phragmites and its impacts, but I just wanted to make sure we're sort of all on the same page. So I'm just going to go through briefly the impacts of invasive Phragmites and sort of where it originated, where it is in Ontario today. So Phragmites is also referred to as common reed or European reed. It's a perennial wetland grass that forms dense monocultures or near monoculture stands, which not much other native vegetation can grow within. It's considered Canada's worst invasive plant. It originated in Eurasia and was brought over likely in seed-contaminated ballasts on ships and possibly through the horticulture trade as well. In the 1990s, the population of Phragmites really started to ramp up and spread, and is now a common sort of common plant you can see on roadway ditches, that type of thing, especially in southern Ontario today. So invasive species tend to have impacts in three main categories, and when they impact all three categories, they tend to be some of the worst invasive species, and Phragmites definitely fits the bill with that one. So it has impacts on the environment, economy, and society or community. To the environment, it can cause loss of biodiversity, loss of habitat. As I mentioned, those monoculture stands really don't leave a lot of space for other species to live and to grow there. It can really impact the flow of water, the quantity and quality of water, especially in wetland environments. It's also allelopathic, which means that it's putting chemicals into the soils to essentially deter other plants from being able to grow around there. So it's very good at being competitive. Phragmites also impacts over 25% of Ontario's species at risk. So really big impacts, and some of these photos are just some of those species it impacts or has the potential to impact. Impacts to the economy, one of the bigger ones is the threat to physical infrastructure and structural damage that it can cause. You can see in this picture here, it's growing through asphalt, so a very hardy plant. It can also affect stormwater management ponds and other infrastructure. It can cause delays and increased costs in construction activities, reduce property values, especially for those waterfront properties. It can really, because it's so tall, just block that view and possibly lower property values. It can also affect productivity of lands, including agriculture. In Ontario, over $3 million is spent annually on Phragmites management. So definitely a species that's having a big impact there. On society, most of the threats, or some of the threats can include fire hazard. Those standing dead brown stands that happen over winter can really pose a risk of fire, especially if they're near public infrastructure or commercial or residential infrastructure. They can also block sight lines along roadways. You can see it here, almost blocking the speed limit sign. Can also reduce access to waterways, important infrastructure in emergency situations. And then, of course, because it's so good at outcompeting other species, it can cause a loss of traditional medicines and resources as well. In Ontario, Phragmites can be found throughout. However, it is most common in southern Ontario along the coastal Great Lakes area. It's found in wet and low-lying areas and a common site along shorelines, highways, and roadway ditches. It does have an extensive root system, which really makes up most of the plant. It's sort of that iceberg situation where 80% of the plant is underground. So digging it up really isn't an option, but it's also what helps it thrive and survive in some harsher conditions. It's often found in aquatic or semi-aquatic environments, but it can also be found in terrestrial. So it can really kind of span a variety of habitats. It prefers standing water, like in wetlands, stream banks, lake shores, and along beaches. It is salt tolerant and susceptible to drought and low oxygen environments and water level fluctuations. That's why it can thrive in ditches, where other species may not do so well. In terms of reproduction, it can reproduce through underground rhizomes and stolons, as you can see there in that top right photo. That's it sort of coming along and really extending so that it can reach water or whatever nutrients it needs. The seed heads can produce quite a lot of seeds. The viability of those seeds can really vary seasonally, so it's not always the same everywhere and can depend on nutrient levels as well. Seed heads are, it can reproduce through seeds, but it's less common use of reproduction for the plant. It's more likely to expand through its rhizomes and root system. Pathways of spread, I'll go through this very briefly, but it can spread both through natural pathways such as wind, water, and animal movement, as well as human-made pathways. So any part of that rhizome system, any part of the plant that's sort of broken off can create a new colony or a new plant in a new location. So when we move equipment and machinery through an area and it picks up pieces of those plants, it can then transport it to an entirely new area and start a new colony of the plant. So that's a really big consideration when we're doing management on the ground. Roads are also important dispersal mechanisms where the seeds can spread as well as the plant can spread along those ditches and roadways quite easily. The biology and life cycle, I'll go through this quite briefly, but just wanted to share some visuals to kind of help you identify it in the field and understand sort of when seeds are produced and when it goes dormant. So germination happens in April or May, but again, can depend on your location and the season, depending on the temperature and whatnot. But what you're going to be looking for are these sort of bright green shoots that are just kind of starting to grow out of the ground. If Phragmites has been there before, it's probably going to start growing all around the sort of dead standing material. So that's something to look for as well. June to July is kind of where the major growth, and you're really going to see it kind of get a lot of height. Flowering happens in August to September, so you'll be looking for these red to purple seed heads that start to appear. And then for the majority of the year, October to March, it's going to go to a more brown color, and you'll see these dead standing stalks when the plant goes dormant. So there are two Phragmites species in Ontario. One is the invasive Phragmites species we've been talking about, but there is a native species as well. We can look at physical characteristics of the plant to help determine which species it is, but there is genetic testing available as well to really determine. Most Phragmites found in Southern Ontario does happen to be in the invasive species, so that's more what you're going to see in Southern Ontario. Stand density is one way we can tell these apart. On the right, you see the invasive Phragmites, as mentioned, so he's typically a near monoculture stand, so you're looking for really thick growth, whereas the native, you typically see it less dense. Height, the bottom picture there is of invasive Phragmites, so invasive Phragmites can get up to 16 feet tall, whereas the native plant tends to max out in height around 7 feet. For stem color and texture, the native species tends to have a reddish to brown or purple color and a smooth texture, whereas the invasive Phragmites has dull tan, beige, and a bit of a rough texture, but this can really vary depending on soil conditions and whatnot. Leaf color, the invasive Phragmites tends to have more of a blue-green, whereas the native is more of a yellow-green leaf. The seed head, I think this one's easier to remember because when we're looking at the invasive, we got to think about it being really good at what it does, which is spreading. That seed head is a lot thicker, a lot bushier compared to the native species. The color of the seed head can vary as well during those sort of summer months when it's just starting to grow. For invasive Phragmites, we have this reddish to purple color, whereas the native is more of a beige brown color. Ligule width is another piece we can look at here, and it's explained more in depth within the best management practice, so I won't go into depth here, but essentially we're looking at this little brown line here. You can see on the natives, the native species has much more of a thick line, whereas the invasive is not. And here's a little snapshot. It's a little blurry, but this is from the best management practice, so it just gives you a little bit of a clearer view. On the right is the invasive Phragmites, and on the left is the native. So you can really see quite a difference in width of the lacule. All right, so talking about management of Phragmites. So the goal of management is to successfully prevent the continued spread or establishment of Phragmites populations, especially when we're looking at large stands that have been well established for a long time. The goal might be just to keep it contained and keep it from spreading further before we actually start to tackle the size of the stand. We're also looking to reduce or eradicate existing populations of Phragmites, as mentioned, and manage Phragmites effectively using the most efficient and effective strategies which create the least possible disturbance to native species. So there's a lot to consider when doing management, and the best management practice really goes into that sort of pre-control checklist of what to do, what to look for, and other strategies as well, but I won't go too in depth here. So key considerations when selecting a Phragmites removal approach: stand size and density, habitat and timing windows, property and adjacent property ownership, permits and permissions, which can really vary depending on the site and the ownership of the site. And as mentioned, the goal is to remove Phragmites with the most efficient strategy and lowest environmental impact. Stand size is a big consideration. As mentioned, if the stand is quite large, your first goal might be to actually just keep it to that size and keep it from expanding, and then kind of go from the outside within. But there's a lot more detail in the best management practice. I wanted to also just quickly show this chart that just shows sort of potential breeding and nesting season. Again, this can really depend based on your location, the season, because it can really depend on the temperatures of that year. But this is just a sort of general guide of what to look at and when most taxa tend to be active. But it's really important to make sure that you're surveying a site before doing any work regardless, to really make sure that there's no species or species at risk present before management takes place. Like I mentioned, there's pre and post surveys, pre and post control surveys, and then during control considerations as well that go all in depth in the best management practice. Another key consideration is cleaning equipment, so preventing further contamination and spread. So as I mentioned, Phragmites is really great at spreading from even just a fragment of the plant. So really important to make sure that we're cleaning equipment before moving it off the site into a new area. Otherwise, we could just be making the problem worse. And with most invasive species, pretty well across the board, it is much more difficult and costly to control Phragmites after it's established than it is to prevent its spread. So prevention should always be considered when we're doing invasive species management. Something to consider as well as to when you are contracting out some of the work is to incorporate clean equipment protocols into tenders, contracts, so that equipment has to be cleaned as a part of the contract before moving on. So the Ontario Invasive Plant Council has a really great clean equipment protocol for industry available on their website that you can check out for more details there. Permitting. So the type of permits you will need and the governing bodies would really depend on the location and method being used for your removal project. If you're ever unsure about the permits and where to obtain them, really, we suggest that you go to your local conservation authority or Ministry of Natural Resources to get more details, but it can really depend whether it's an aquatic site or terrestrial or a mix of both. So when to consider consulting a professional, projects on land and versus projects on water, like I mentioned, can really depend on who you're reaching out to. So again, the BMP goes into great detail here. I won't go into here, but here's just some agencies that you could reach out to for more details. So for management strategies, we've broken it down in the best management practices between strategies for on-land or terrestrial situations versus aquatic situations, as well as whether specialized training and equipment is needed or not. So we'll start off with that focus on without needing specialized training and equipment, and then head towards the more specialized training equipment removal strategies. So without the specialized training, some of the options for removal are selective cutting / spading, grazing, and then tarping / solarizing or cutting seed heads. So selective cutting and spading on land. So this is a really great postcard that was developed and it was included in the best management practice. And it really shows the spading technique, which is very effective, especially in these sandy environments. It's essentially using the spade at a 45-degree angle to cut the stem below the surface so that that cut portion of the stem does not have access to light and will not regrow, as well as minimizing impact on the environment. So this is a really great option, especially for volunteer grassroots organizations. It's something that can be done with just volunteers on the ground with minimal equipment needed. And it's just important, as shown in that last picture, to make sure that you're removing all of those stems and disposing of them properly in the end. Some of the benefits are the minimal disturbance. Again, this is best for small or low density stands along sandy shorelines. And this can be done during June or July during that primary growth stage. If seed heads are present, you can use pruners to cut the seed heads and dispose of them into bags first before cutting the stem. So grazing is also a technique that's occasionally used. Goats, cattle, or other grazing animals can help to reduce the above ground biomass and the spread of Phragmites. So this can be impractical on sites that are not such as in sensitive habitats or where you're looking to maintain other vegetation that might be present. And this technique really should be used with other strategies as well. It might be a good technique to remove that above ground biomass and then later tarp or applied herbicide to any new growth that comes up, but really not as effective if just used solely on its own. As the depending on the time of year, grazing can actually promote regrowth of the plant, so that's something definitely to consider. Tarping and solarizing. So this, as mentioned, after grazing or removal of that above ground biomass, tarps can be put down to essentially keep sunlight from reaching the plant and preventing it from regrowing. So you can see here, this is from the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority. They've tarped the area, making sure to secure the edges of the tarp and making sure it's a very thick, dark colored tarp as well. For this method, you do need to sort of return to the site to continue to monitor it and make sure there's no growth on the sides of the tarp. But this is a technique that has been used as well. So cutting seed heads, this can be done just during the beginning, the sort of flowering time before the seeds are viable in, say, August or late summer. This technique is sort of a last resort option. As seeds are not always the most viable part or the most common or easily the way in which the plant easily spreads, it's really sort of a you have no other option type management. So this can be done by snipping off the seed heads and disposing of them properly in black garbage bags during that specific time of year, just to prevent further spread when wind blows it later in the season when the seeds are viable. So techniques for removal on water, and this would be selective cutting or spading. There are other techniques available, but again, those require more specialized equipment and training, which I'll talk about in just a bit. Cutting and spading on water. So there's a variety of different cutting tools that can be used, and I'll show pictures of those in just a bit. But other considerations are, which are important for this technique, is some sort of barge, a boat, or some way to sort of collect the biomass and take it off the water and dispose of it properly on land. This can be done during the primary growth stage before seed heads develop, or during late winter, early spring if it's feasible. So the raspberry cane cutter is an option that can be used. Essentially, this technique, it can really depend on water depth as well as the clarity of the water, but essentially trying to reach I believe it's 30 centimeters depth, or maybe it's inches, I might be mixing that up. but cutting the plant below the water, so essentially light can't get to it, and it won't regrow. And then making sure when we do cut it to remove that biomass from the area. So you can see the cane cutter being used for that here. There's also an option of using gas-powered cutters, as long as they're lubricated, and sort of some of the equipment might need to be sort of altered to make sure it's usable for the water and lubricated in a certain way. But this is a great way to sort of speed up the process and do larger stands that are within water with the same technique of cutting it below water so light cannot get to it and it can't regrow. And that big piece, like I mentioned, is making sure to contain the cut biomass in any way you can and remove as much of it as possible from the water. So additional strategies, so these are ones that can be undertaken by professionals. There are sort of larger machines to mechanically cut in water, as well as spraying over water and other methods. So we'll go into those in just a little bit, but these are for trained professionals to undertake. So herbicides available for control in Phragmites. There are different options. There's a bit more option for dry land application with WeatherMax, VisionMax, Weather Pro, or Arsenal Powerline. On water, currently the option is Habitat Aqua. So this may require a letter of opinion from the Ministry of Natural Resources and/or other permits from Ministry of Environment, Conservation, and Parks, depending on the application, whether it's on water or land. So for those who are not sort of trained and professionally applying this and looking to have a contractor work on this, these are some questions that can be considered when asking a contractor to make sure that they know what they're doing and they're going to take all the precautions necessary to protect the environment, remove the plant properly. And I won't go through these in depth, but you can see here just questions related to species at risk, use of the chemical, insurance, and that sort of thing. Disposal strategies is also covered in the best management practice, so we'll go through some of those here. They include bagging, burning, and drying. For disposal considerations, if plants need to be transported, use caution to avoid spreading seeds, stolons, and rhizomes. Use a tarp or screen, especially for large amounts of biomass. Refer to local bylaws and policy for disposal, transportation, or burning of invasive plants. It can really vary by municipality, so definitely a good idea to check in with what bylaws are there. Use caution when handling plants, especially when they've been treated with herbicide. For bagging, there's sort of two options. You'll want to be using black garbage bags to really prevent sunlight from reaching the plants. You can dispose of all plant material in a landfill, so you can contact your landfill as mentioned, see if they accept invasive plant material. Option 2 is allowing the plant material to sit in plastic bags in the sun for at least 3 weeks to make sure the plant's no longer viable and to really just cook it in the bags. Then you can compost in a backyard composter, but never compost invasive plants if you've not treated them beforehand by putting them in the sun or otherwise. Compost might be an option as well at commercial compost facilities, so you can contact your local municipality. It's important that these commercial facilities reach a certain temperature to make sure to kill off the plant and make it not viable anymore. And again, do not put Phragmites in backyard compost unless you've bagged it for at least 3 weeks in the sun. Burning might be an option as well. You can isolate Phragmites in a pile and burn. Make sure to follow all open burn advisories and keep water on hand. Disposal for pile and dry. So this is a good option for those big removal, especially over water. You can pile the plant material at least 30 meters from the shoreline and allow it to dry in the sun. Once dry, you can dispose of the plant material by burning or bagging or composting. You can monitor the pile in subsequent years as well. If there's new growth, you can pull those out and put it on top. But really important to make sure when we do create these piles that it's not going to be in an area where water might get to it and pull it into a new area, or it might not, or that it won't blow away either. So lots of considerations there. The best management practice also talks about post-control activities and consideration and restoration strategies as well. Restoration is really reserved for terrestrial removal projects. And depending on how long Phragmites has been on the site and what the seed bank was before, you may not have to take any sort of restoration activities or restoration actions, as the seed bank might be there to just sort of regrow and reestablish those native species. But there's definitely some considerations on if you do want to overseed, making sure to use habitat appropriate native seeds as well, or for plantings. So final advice. So as we are here with the at this meeting, collaboration and connecting to others and other experts, other people that have been doing work is really helpful in making sure that we're sort of doing it properly. So connect with others in your area, professionals or community groups, ask for specific help or advice if you need it. Select the least harmful control method, keeping effort and efficiency in mind. Dispose of Phragmites appropriately to prevent it from further regrowing. Revisit sites each year to monitor for regrowth and do follow-up treatments as well. And just with that, I want to say a big thank you to all the contributors to the 2020 update. The best managed practice was again just tweaked and updated, like Vicki mentioned, in 2024. So it's been more recently updated since, but wanted to just mention these names here and thank them for all their work. And you can definitely stay tuned with the Ontario Invasive Plant Council for any following follow-up best managed practice workshops to learn more about Phragmites and other invasive species as well. And I just wanted to also add, both Vicki and myself, our emails are right there. Vicki definitely is probably more of the person to reach out to if you're more interested in other details in the best management practice. But yeah, with that, I want to say thanks everyone, and I'm happy to take any questions at this time.
Thanks so much, Gabby, for giving a great overview of the BMP. I would like to point out a couple of things. Like the document is meant to be a living document. We're constantly learning more information, whatnot. Just so folks are aware, seed heads for invasive Phragmites may also be blonde. I've seen both purple and blonde in the same stand, and I don't actually know the why, but I'm sure somebody's researching that. So just so you're aware, if you see blonde seed heads, it doesn't mean it's native. The other thing as well, sometimes when invasive Phragmites is just getting established in an area, it can look like native Phragmites as lower stature, smaller seed heads, and if it's in water, it can actually have a reddish stalk as well. So there are other physical characteristics you can use. Michael McTavish's lab also has a really nice document that they produced to help you kind of tease out whether you are dealing with the native strain or the invasive strain of Phragmites. And if you really don't know, because sometimes I even have difficulty, and some of these morphological characteristics, like the ligule width, is kind of borderline. It could be both, and it's not really a strong characteristics one way or the other. So before treatment happens, there is thankfully a DNA program being rolled out as well for positively identifying the strains that you have. There's a kit, and this is through the Invasive Species Center, which is going to be talked about later in the day. So just so you're aware. The other thing I'd like to point out, there is another product, a glyphosate product that's now available for us to use. Glyphosate is off patent, so any chemical company can make it. It's called Timberline by Belcom. So that we can update that in our BMP next time we go around. And talking with meeting with Jeff Sharp with the St. Clair Region CA a few weeks ago, he mentioned to me that they were using Arsenal Power Line. So that's the dryland imazapyr, and he said they used it a little bit earlier in the season, and it actually prevented seed head development. So for those of you that don't know, if you use the imazapyr product, you won't see any difference in that plant until the next growing season. It still looks green. It looks like you didn't spray it. With the glyphosate products, you can go back 2-3 weeks later and do any touch up. Just if you see any surviving plants, then you can do a secondary treatment with that. And then the other thing I'd like to mention is in some areas we're finding that there is resistance to glyphosate. We don't get a good kill. And so there's two components to that. It's maybe water source. You have to really pay attention to your water that you're using for the herbicide, particularly with the glyphosate. It'll bind to sediments, whatnot, make it inactive. So you get a poor kill. The other thing is, some of our sites, what I've noticed is the Phragmites is growing adjacent to a corn or soybean field. And when we don't get a good kill, my theory is it gets exposure to low doses of glyphosate year after year after year. And so it's not as effective. And so what we typically do then is a tank mix. So we have the Arsenal Power Line and the Weather Pro together. So just a few comments about that. If you're using tarping, just pay attention because sometimes tarps can kill your seed bank and you may have to reseed because it really heats the sediment. So that's one factor to consider with that method. And then actually, so I'll stop talking. Vicki, you have some questions I see in the yeah, oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, there are a couple questions here. How long do seeds live when they're put in black bags or in nature? Do the seeds go dormant in deep ground when they don't have light?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So for the seeds, once they're mature, what I've seen is if they don't germinate the next growing season, and for them to germinate, they'd have to be in exposed muck, not necessarily in water, but in muck, wet ground. It only takes one of those seeds to germinate, and they can produce a lot of ramets that growing season. So even though it's really low viability, thank goodness for the seeds, it doesn't take many to get a new colony established, and those seeds can disperse quite a long way. So that's one factor. So if you're going to cut them, I have two strategies. One you tip over the plant, put it in a bag. So you usually work with somebody else. They hold the bag open and you snip it off, and the head goes into the plastic bag. Just let it rot. Put it in tie up the bag so the seeds don't get out and it'll rot. Or I have also used brown paper yard waste bags and used a burn barrel and burned the seeds as well. But typically, once you pass the growing season and the plants haven't germinated, thank goodness they're not going to. So that's really one of the few bonuses with this invasive plant.
And you say like if the seeds are placed in a black plastic bag we always recommend like 7 to 10 days. You think that probably enough or be longer?
I'd leave them there for as long as you can. Peek in and see if they're rotted. Yeah.
Are there hybrid varieties?
Excellent question. So there's research going on. There was one strain in the States a number of years ago that was picked up, and it was with Bernd Bloss's lab at Cornell, and he said nuke it, take herbicide to it, don't let it get started. So fortunately, there isn't a lot of evidence that it's happening, but there's just it's interesting to me because there's a lot of confusion with the native strains. They seem to be growing more aggressively and don't know what's going on with that. And are there hybrids? But there's certainly the DNA, the genetic work that's going on is going to help immensely with that. But right now, I am not aware of any hybrids in Ontario, and I could be corrected on that, but I haven't heard of that. Thankfully, not like the cattail, which is very rare.
What is the best practice and equipment to use for treating Phragmites in deep water when using a herbicide if boats aren't allowed in the water body?
No boats at all, so no motorized boats, and probably what you're looking at is a rowboat or a canoe, and use a backpack sprayer, basically. You don't have too many options if you can't use a motorized boat, and so then there's a safety aspect, particularly if you have a backpack sprayer. There's also containment. You also have to factor that in. Like when we're doing over water work, even if it's Habitat Aqua, we always have bins to contain in case there's a spill, bins to put the concentrate in as well if we're taking that out, not mixed product. I'm going to be talking about the spray drones, an emerging tool that is a possibility as well. But yeah, you're limited for herbicide application and also to if the water's deep enough, possibly you can get out of the boats and walk in the water with chest waders to cut to drown. That is not always an option. A lot of these sites either to do that safely or even access. But some of these sites are very challenging.
Would it be possible to have the links of the new products? Of these new products? Yes.
The herbicides?
I think that might refer to the Arsenal power line or that you mentioned.
Arsenal Power is not a new product. It's in the BMP. It's for dryland application. So Arsenal Power line has imazapyr as the active ingredient. So that's the equivalent of the other dryland products that have the glyphosate. The new product, Habitat Aqua, with just the imazapyr product, you add a water-safe surfactant to that product. That's the only aquatic-safe herbicide we have available in Canada right now. We absolutely need to have a second option. I'm going to be talking about that at the end of our meeting today, but we need to have the glyphosate equivalent, the Roundup Custom, which they use down in Long Point under their emergency use research. Yeah, right now, the only glyphosate product I mentioned that's not in the BMP is that Timberline, but the others are all mentioned in the BMP.
Yeah, so we could link the BMP in the chat too afterwards for anyone interested.
Sure.
I think maybe we have time for one more question. So can mowing the frag 3 to 4 weeks before spraying help with spraying effectiveness?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and I get the why, but here's the thing: what you're trying to kill is the below ground structures. So what you see above ground, multiply that by 3, 4, 5 times. That's what you're trying to kill, all the roots and rhizomes. So really, to do that, you want as much leaf surface as possible to intercept the herbicide, because once the herbicide gets on the leaves, then it gets translocated down to low ground structures. If you're cutting that plant, you're not getting as much leaf surface available to intercept. So don't recommend that at all. I don't think you're going to get an effective kill.
Okay, we might have time for one more question. Wondering about spread via boots and clothing. Should people change footwear on site, bag up hip waders, etc.? Same idea for cutting equipment. I worry about potential for spread from control equipment. More guidance appreciated.
It's an excellent question again. If you're going into the Phragmites and the seeds aren't viable yet, like this time of year they're fluffy and they get on your clothes or whatever. But usually in the growing season they're not. They're stuck to the seed head. So the only way you would be contributing to spread is if you have frag bits on you, like on your boots, maybe the bottom of your boots or whatever. Just make sure they're clean. But yeah, and that's just not for frag, it's for all of our aquatic invasives. Just make sure that you're not transporting them from site to site.
Totally, very important. All right, I think that's all the time that we have for questions. But yeah, really appreciate all the interest there. But yeah, thank you, Janice and Vicki, for your expertise in bringing that here too, because there always is new information. So definitely a living document that's an important highlight for the best management practice. Thanks, Janice.
Sure. Yeah, you're very
But
welcome. Thanks, Gabby.
I'm going to pass it over to Janice to facilitate the volunteer and grassroots management effort panel. So thanks, Janice.
Yeah, thank you. I'm absolutely delighted to introduce this next session, these amazing group of fraggers. And they have so much information to convey, which is great to follow the BMP because they have the practicalities. And they've been doing the work in the trenches. Every single one of them has a commonality. The retired professionals, they have this unique ability to bring the communities together. They are excellent at engaging their communities, the partners, educating, providing awareness, just in a positive way. And collectively, I bet you they have tens of thousands of volunteer hours, just phenomenal contribution. And I know this for a fact, if they had not started their local community groups, their communities would be an absolute disaster still with Phragmites. So I'm just so delighted that they are here today to share with you what they have learned. We're going to start in a geographical fashion with Nancy Vidler and Bill McDonald with the Lambton Shores Phragmites Community Group. This is in the Port Franks area on Lake Huron. I believe they are the first Phragmites working group to ever been formed and have a lot of great information to share. Then just next door to them is Sandra Marshall in Ipperwash. So she's under their umbrella, but she also formed a smaller local group that she has a really great program going there. Then we're going to move up the shoreline of Lake Huron to Oliphant area. So this is just north of Sauble Beach, where Leslie Wood has formed an amazing community group and done a phenomenal job there. And then we're going to move interior up to Sundridge, where Mary Lee Konderick and Karen Mertens formed the Lake Bernard for Mace Community Group. So welcome to all of you. We're going to start with just introductions, presentations from each of them in that specific order. So Nancy and Bill, can start with you two. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity for Bill and I to present this morning. We'd like to share how we got started as a grassroots organization and how we've met challenges over the 16 years of our involvement in the fight against Phragmites, invasive Phragmites. Next slide, please. Our interest in restoration began in 2009 when Phragmites was identified on the Port Franks beach. We started where it was noticed and where people were most affected, but soon came to realize that the problem was much larger and required a watershed approach. This project became municipal-wide over 16 years and is still growing. Next slide. We also realized the great importance of reaching out to the community at large to raise awareness. A successful program is dependent upon that, and over the years, we have developed working partnerships and relationships with like-minded groups. The support of government at all levels is also essential. All of this helps greatly in the procurement of financing through grants. This is an extensive but far from exhaustive list of the ways we have connected with stakeholders and the public. The list includes speaking presentations, printed resource materials, online resources, educational materials, social media, and more. Next slide. As mentioned, partnerships are critical to having a successful project. As the project grew, more partners got on board, as evidenced by the list on this slide. Mapping is one of the first and most important ways to establish the scope of the problem and develop a successful plan for restoration. This map highlights in red areas where Phragmites infestation was identified in Lambton Shores when we began our work. Next slide. Here's what we were dealing with at the very beginning on the Port Franks beach. At that time, very few people were even aware of the insidious nature of this invasive reed. Next slide. Volunteers rallied, and with proper permits in place, we hired a contractor and tackled the problem. Early detection and rapid response meant that costs and labor were considerably less than they would have been if the problem had not been addressed promptly. Next slide. Here's a picture of the volunteers at work in the dunes. Next slide. This picture was taken in 2022, and it shows the dune after remediation. Over the years, the Port Franks Beach Homeowners Association has become more involved in beach stewardship, including the monitoring and eradication of invasive species. For our group, having an exit plan to hand over responsibility to other established groups and organizations is essential to ensuring continuity going forward. Otherwise, the problem will return. Next slide. Before handing the presentation over to Bill, I would like to mention that our website contains a wealth of resources, and this is an example of our current print pamphlet. Next slide. This and many other print resources are available for download. Now I'd like to invite Bill to continue.
Thanks, Nancy. Good morning, everyone. In 2013, in conjunction with Dr. Janice Gilbert, a Phragmites management plan was developed for our municipality using a watershed approach, which we define as taking a holistic approach to managing invasive Phragmites throughout the community of Lambton Shores to prevent the reinfestation of rehabilitated areas. The management plan identified specific Phragmites management areas, we call them PMAs, requiring control, estimated the control costs for each site, and prioritized the sites to be tackled. Next slide. Our largest remediation project is a 59-hectare coastal meadow marsh adjacent to a Carolinian forest at Wood Drive along Lake Huron, which had become a Phragmites monoculture. When touring this site with Monty McNaughton, a former provincial government cabinet minister, and then our local MPP, he very accurately described this area as an environmental catastrophe. We had little experience or knowledge as to how to go about finding funds for remediation, but we're lucky enough to have the assistance of Dr. Jan's late husband, Greg Dunn, who wrote most of our first funding application to the National Wildlife Conservation Fund. Success. We were awarded a 3-year grant and thus began our Wood Drive adventure. Next slide. This project encompasses 5 blocks of land as seen here, with only 2 of them having owners even interested in controlling frag. Block 4 was owned by a church, which operated it as a nonprofit seasonal campground and day camp, offering affordable nature education and outdoor activities to kids aged 5 to 17. Shoreline recreation had always been an integral part of their activities, but by 2013, frag had completely taken over their beach, forcing them to post this sign. Next slide. They had even gone to the expense of installing a swimming pool with the lake no longer available to them. When we approached them with our plans to help them remove frag from their beach, they were ecstatic. This became a multi-year project and was celebrated in 2018 when, next slide, a volunteer appreciation barbecue and work day was held, as this flyer depicts. As this next photo shows, next slide, we had a great turnout of local residents, seasonal campers, and even our mayor showed up. Next slide. Here are some of the volunteers at work spading new frag shoots. As Gabby had mentioned earlier, it's an effective technique that kills the plant before it can grow and spread. Following several years of control effort, as these next photos show, next slide, campers could once again resume their shoreline activities. Next slide. And just like the beach owners in Port Franks, who have now taken over control efforts on their beach, the church camp is managing frag on their property with little further involvement from our group. Similarly, Block 5 is owned by a couple who also welcomed our involvement and have actively participated in frag removal there. And they intend to maintain their property in its natural state in perpetuity. Next slide. As for the other 3 blocks, it was a completely different story. Unfortunately, these lands had no readily identifiable owners, and they had no economic value as they were mostly underwater when lake levels were high. No one was taking responsibility for controlling frag on them. The province did not consider them crown lands and described them as orphan properties. This created a significant challenge for us, and everything from trying to convince the ministry to issue us a letter of opinion that would allow remediation on these lands, to obtaining funding, when many funding sources do not allow for work to be done on privately owned lands. It was physically challenging too. When we initially started work here, most of the frag was located on dry land, where we could legally use chemical control, which could be relatively easily applied via backpack sprayers or from vehicle-mounted spray tanks. That changed rapidly as lake levels began to rise, ultimately rising about 2 meters during the early stages of the project. And this was at a time before chemical controls over water were allowed in Ontario. So our contractor, the Invasive Phragmites Control Center, had to pivot to a different control method. With most of the frag here now underwater, the cut to drown method was developed, whereby amphibious cutting machines called truck saws, built in Sweden, were acquired. They cut frag underwater at the sediment level, thus depriving the plants of the nutrients required to support growth. The biomass was moved onshore far enough that wave action would not drag it back into the lake and spread viable plant material and seeds to non-contaminated areas. Next slide. Sorry. Yes, okay, fine, great. This before photo shows a truck saw at work along a channel, which is completely inundated with frag. Next slide. And here's the after photo, which now shows a diverse, flourishing landscape of native plants that have evolved from the natural seed bank since the elimination of the frag monoculture along this channel. Over $1 million has been spent here, with about 75% funded through grants provided by the Canadian federal and Ontario provincial governments, along with cash and other grants and in-kind donations from environmental organizations, corporate donors, municipal government, conservation authorities, service groups, and volunteers, along with substantial in-kind donations from our contractor. The Lambton Shores Phragmites Community Group has volunteered over 10,000 hours to this project to date. Did our small grassroots volunteer group of retirees, inexperienced in environmental matters, think for a minute back in 2009 that we could successfully take on a project of this magnitude? Not in your life. But we persevered, and with Dr. Gilbert's tremendous help, have reduced the frag population at this site to less than 1% from what it was originally. We learned a lot along the way and are happy to share our knowledge and resources with others who find themselves just starting out or early into frag remediation. Just ask. And now I'd like to hand this back over to Nancy.
Next slide. Thank you, Bill. When we look back over the years, we derive a great feeling of accomplishment and are very proud to have gained the recognition of our community for our work. We weren't in it for the recognition, but it's always nice to be appreciated. As Bill has said, we're very happy to offer guidance to any group tackling this problem. Just ask. And here's how to reach us. The next slide, please. We can be reached at the information on this slide. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy and Bill. And kudos to you again. This is very inspiring work. And well, I appreciate it. You see all the hearts coming up on the screen for you. Next, we're going to pivot to Sandra Marshall, who lives just down the road. And welcome, Sandra. Take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Dan. The Ipperwash Frag Fighters, formed in 2016, were discovered when Phragmites were discovered along the dunes. At that time, each volunteer donated $20 to purchase supplies to get the group started. This logo was designed with blue for the water or lake, brown for the beach, and green for the agricultural lands. Whenever we do any work, this sign is out there so that people are aware of where we are in the community and that work is being done. Next slide. Seeing how Phragmites had overtaken the shores of Kettle Point really motivated us. Work was begun on the beach first because of the educational opportunities. It is very visual, so we didn't go from the source, went from where the most impact would be for the community. Achieving success requires early detection, rapid response, as outlined by Nancy and Bill, site-specific tools, partnerships, volunteers, education, and funding. Next slide. Prior to these photos, Nancy Vidler with the Lambton Shores Phragmites Community Group arranged a stakeholders meeting and a public information session. Dr. Jan was a guest speaker, and there were displays and information from both the Ausable Bayfield Conservation Authority, the St. Clair Region Conservation Authority, and Kettle Stony Point First Nation. The municipality of Lambton Shores and an agricultural representative also attended. As you can see from these pictures, Phragmites in the beach dunes were sparse and spaced far apart. This is where early detection really makes a difference. Next slide. Education often takes place spontaneously. In the top right picture, while scouting out the Phragmites locations with Nancy, she used this as an opportunity to explain the problem with Phragmites and how it spreads. The machinery, as you can see, and the rhizome. Beach walkers on the bottom right picture also asked questions when I was tagging the Phragmites. They were absolutely amazed at the rhizome systems and how many plants could spread from one stalk. Here you can see Laura Williams in the top left picture. She was a university student at the time, very familiar with Phragmites, and I used her expertise to walk the beach about 5 kilometers and tag Phragmites as they were growing. This was a really good conversation starter, and it really helped when we had volunteers. Further education on our social media sites show that Phragmites are not always green and lush. Our beach is also the site of numerous roots and shoots that wash up. Even a small piece of frag can sprout new growth. So we have an educational link on our Community Association website. It is under centeripperwashcommunity.ca, and we developed lots of educational pages to share with our members at the Center Ipperwash Community Association. Next slide. In our first year, we received funding from the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry to hire a licensed contractor to spray and roll one section of the swale as an educational test project. In the following years, new growth was treated with backpack spraying, raspberry cane cutters, spades, and still saws. Next slide. And this is, so I apologize. Yeah, so that's what happened. Next slide. Another public event in the summer of 2020 had us heading to the first swale. Now, for people not familiar, we are a very, very sandy beach, and we have dunes and swales, otherwise known as swamps, that continue for about 1 kilometer up the road. This is the swale that is closest to the beach. 2 residents had started to remove a dense frag monoculture from their property, if you look at the top right picture. So we decided to step in and help. They are 2 of the most active and responsible volunteers that we have to date. So whatever we gave to them, they have given back tenfold. This was an entirely new venture, dealing with water and dense Phragmites. Very few of our volunteers are willing to don chest waders, but were willing to work on land. Some MNRF rangers donned life jackets and really helped out. That's the bottom right picture as well. Next slide. Here you can see some before and after pictures. I had never anticipated going into swales at over 70 years of age in that dense monoculture and then ending up with the beautiful results for the after picture. Next, please. Winter is an ideal time to remove Phragmites. The standing dead were cut at the surface using the flat edge of a rake. The standing dead frag is much lighter to work with, and winter cutting makes it easier to spot and remove regrowth later. Some biomass was tarped for pickup by the municipality. Other piles, don't spread this, were burned on site. Tarps, don't spend money on commercial tarps. Visit your local lumber yard and ask for the tarps that are wrapped around the lumber, and you will have lots and lots and lots of resources for many years to come. Next slide. Methods to control and eliminate Phragmites is varied, and we have had to adapt to the environmental conditions and the amount of money available. We have been fortunate to receive grants from Green Shovels and FOCA, the Federation of Ontario Cottagers Association, as well as support from our Central Ipperwash Community Association and Dr. Jan. Next, please. When land is difficult to access, a boat and ice sleds with a pulley system were used to transfer the biomass to land. So if you look at the top left picture, that is the truck bed, truck liner, and people pulling up the cut biomass with a pulley. Spraying and rolling was employed when the swale was dry, and a fat truck was also used. The most impressive action was when an amphibious machine called a truck sawer was used to speed up the cutting process. In 4 hours, Dr. Jan cut and removed more than our volunteers had done in weeks. My volunteers were astounded, and they said, "And why did we do 4 weeks before?" But it's really good to be able to get in with small groups, because then we can really take care of making sure that we are environmentally responsible. And we walked around and left areas for any of the red-winged blackbirds and whatever other life we found. And we had a little snapping turtle that would sort of nip at our legs, not nip, just bump, and let us know that it was there. The top left picture shows the removal with the truck liner. Then it was trucked to a site close by for the municipality to pick up. And the biomass is then taken specifically to the municipality's invasive species site, where it will be dried and it will be taken care of in a responsible manner. Our municipality has been very flexible with the ways they pick up our cut biomass, bagged, tarped, or piled. They have been awesome. They even fold and leave the tarps for future use. Next, please. The top left picture shows the volunteers at our first frag hunt. And notice our sign is displayed prominently. They have been awesome. Volunteers were shown on this first event on how to identify Phragmites and the proper use of spading. And thank you to Lynn Short for that. The top center picture shows volunteers spading on the beach. Over the first 3 years, spading was done once a month during June, July, and August. Now the beach is monitored closely, but no patches of Phragmites have returned. The next 2 pictures show people bagging. We had done some cutting in the swale, and you can still see in the bottom left picture the swale of the Phragmites that are still left there, but we just piled in one spot and they bagged and took it out to the road.
Shirley Brandt.
Oh, sorry.
FaceTime video.
My apologies. Oh, shoot. I'm sorry. I don't know how to do that. I can't get her off. Okay, I apologize most wholeheartedly. Not all volunteers are able to help on the ground, as you can see by that center picture. Danielle works behind the scene using her computer skills and was more than happy to handle the food for our volunteers. And in the last picture there, you can see we were set up on the beach for another Phragmites removal event. Laura, the same university student, made a presentation, and it was wonderful to see such a great age range. The St. Clair Region Conservation Authority even had several student rangers present, as well as a Kubota for picking up the bagged biomass. After a couple of hours of working, they were more than ready to enjoy the lunch provided. Next, please. In all our endeavors, every care is taken to ensure that nesting birds and other wildlife are not harmed. Educational signs direct interested people to check out our work. The IPP have now expanded from removing just Phragmites to also removing invasive species like spotted knapweed and sweet white clover from our dunes. With constant monitoring, we are able to return our beach, dunes, and swale to their natural beauty. Next, please. It only takes one person to start the ball rolling. Special thanks to Joan Graham for recognizing the Phragmites problem at Ipperwash and for inviting Nancy Vidler to our community. Without Nancy, the Lambton Shores Phragmites Community Group, and Dr. Jan and her team's support, we would not be where we are today. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Sandra.
I
We'll now,
apologize for that.
it's, hey, it's all good. Next, we're going to invite Leslie Wood from the Oliphant region. Welcome, Leslie. We can't hear you just in case you're talking. You might be on mute.
There we go. Okay, so good morning, everyone. So I'm talking about Phragmites a little bit north of the two previous speakers, talking about the Elephant Fishing Islands. And in 2017, very little was known about the invasive Phragmites on the Saugeen Peninsula, even despite all the work that was being done further south of us. So it had invaded as it invaded hundreds of acres in the fishing islands. Most people did not know what it was or of its significance. Next slide, please. So by 2017, Frag had arrived and was choking shorelines and degrading the wetlands, causing tremendous damage. The picture on the bottom left shows where the Phragmites was crowding in and cutting off access for landowners from their land into the water. On the right-hand side is the island, on the left-hand side is the water, but you can see it's a continuation of Phragmites. It was causing risk to all life cycles of wildlife and plants. And very importantly for us out in the islands, it was causing obstructed visibility in the main watercraft channel, which is shown on the right-hand side, top left. That channel, we call it the gut. And Frag was cutting the channel width in half, making it dangerous for everybody that was using it, which includes power boaters going as fast as they can, kayakers who were getting stuck in the Frag on the edge of the gut, and people anchored and fishing, plus people trying to swim in the middle of all of this chaos. So it was becoming extremely dangerous the way the Phragmites was moving in. You can see on the bottom on the dry dormant stage of Phragmites was on the bank on one side, and that was an absolute fire hazard because there were several cottagers in behind all of that. So this is the damage that had reached Oliphant in 2017. Next slide, please. So that year, 2017, a group of us on 6 islands north that were situated north of the worst of the Frag did get together and got well learn in Phragmites. And we formed the Elephant Fishing Island Phragmite Community Group to deal with the Phragmites and one very large stand that was near 2 of our islands. And that large stand is shown on the bottom right-hand side. The only method really to use for Frag and Mod at that time was cut to drown. So we went out and bought equipment to get to work doing that. We bought multiple raspberry cane cutters that have been mentioned before, and 3 of our landowners bought still saws, which are one of them shown there on the top right. We began to work on that very large Frag stand. We worked all summer through 2017, but we had to admit that we couldn't finish it because it was too much for us. So in 2018, we hired Janice Gilbert with her truxers, which is shown there on the right hand on the bottom. When we were working by ourselves, and as continues no matter what we're doing, we're always cutting to kill the rhizomes. If you don't kill the rhizomes, which are shown in the picture, the tangle of white rhizomes, if you don't kill the rhizomes, you won't kill Phragmites. So we were cutting to drown, which requires cutting the stalk right at the bottom of the stalk, right at the lake bed. You have to do that multiple years in a row, and you have to be sure that you remove all of the stalks, including the leaves, because if you leave them in the water, you can see that they float and they spring roots and sprouts, and they'll drift off and spread Phragmites all around. So you have to remove it from the water and dispose of it appropriately. Next slide, please. So from 2017 to 21, we volunteers spent 3 to 4 hours most days in the water working on frag from July 15th to September of every year. The biomass, the way that we managed to dispose of the biomass depended on where we were and how high the water was. So we were using our still cutters and our raspberry and cane cutters and moving the frag onto shore where we would burn it when the water was low. But the water fluctuated tremendously over 4 years. It went up 2 feet in 4 years. So when the water was high between 2019 and 2020, we had to buy 2 rafts, as you can see on the right-hand picture. We bought 2 rafts with motors. So when we cut the biomass, we would transport the biomass over to the government dock on the mainland, and we would unload it by hand into the waste bin, which you can see there on the bottom right corner, which was provided by the municipality of the town of South Bruce Peninsula. So you'd spend several hours loading the raft, cutting it, and then almost half an hour to motor over there, and then unload it in the bin, and the municipality would take away the biomass. In 2020, we took 26 rafts over to that bin. Next slide, please. From 2018 to 21, the Janice Gilbert came with her crew for 15 days each summer, with the cost covered primarily by donations from our group, from Nature Conservancy, Bruce Power, and from all kinds of in-kind donation from our volunteers and landowners. The picture on the bottom left shows 3 trucksters working in a dense mass of Phragmites. In the middle, there's a stationary barge owned by one of our landowners. And on top of that barge is a Mini-X, which is, again, loaned by one of our landowners and volunteers. The 3 trucksters were cutting the frag in water that was in many places over our heads. And the Mini-X would load it on the barges, and it would then be taken to government dock again. So the 3 trucksters were essential, and our assistance with all of these volunteers and their equipment was critical. Next slide, please. So the next picture shows moving the biomass to government dock, which was done by the little barges. Some of those barges were our barges. Some of them were Janice Gilbert's barges. They were motoring over to government dock, which you can see where the barge, the boats, and another motorized barge owned by a landowner were all traveling to government dock, where the town of South Bruce Peninsula guys were running the backhoe, lifting it into dump trucks. And in 2020, they took away 328 tons of biomass in 15 days. And that was a $25,000 in-kind donation each year from the town of South Bruce Peninsula. Next slide, please. In 2022, low water struck, and that made a tremendous difference because all of these large barges could not work in that deep water. The work that had been done, cut to drown in the low water, had tremendous pros, though. It created tremendous landowner engagement and sense of stewardship. 9,000 hours was put in by 92 people over 5 years, and that was in the water, and manual labor. We had definitely slowed the spread of frag, and what was coming back was much sparser. Working in the water like that gave us an opportunity to identify native plants and to be very careful not to cut them. And similarly, that was able to be done even on the truxers. But the cons were that the control needed to move more quickly because of the fact that there was such a large area of Phragmites in hundreds of acres. And cut to drown was expensive financially and physically exhausting. Recutting in the same site was needed for several years. So fortunately, in 2022, Habitat Aqua had been just approved in Canada, which would allow herbicide application on Phragmites growing in water. So we took the opportunity to get into using Habitat or herbicides to control Phragmites control. The herbicides would be applied by the Janice Gilbert's crew, who are licensed and trained to do absolutely this. And the Nature Conservancy applied for and got the required permit for the use of Habitat Aqua on Phragmites in water. And they also got their letter of opinion for the use of Weather Pro to use on Phragmites on land. And the Phragmites would still be, volunteers would still be doing a little bit of cutting to drown. Next slide, please. So in 2022, control moved to herbicide for the first time with a little bit of cutting to drown. So the frag sites were all surveyed and mapped out by kayak and on foot by Nature Conservancy with our help. And all sites were assessed for the best control method to be used, which the assessment was done by Janice Gilbert and Nature Conservancy. So when it came to working on the densest growth in water, there could be spray done by that big fat truck that was shown in the last slide pack, or it could be done from John boats in the water. For medium and sparse, it was done, sometimes it was still cutting to drown, but on land there could be spraying from the densest, on the densest areas from the fat truck or with backpack sprayers. So the results were impressive that year. Still a lot of acres were cleared by cut to drown, but water was starting, the densest Phragmite was being removed by herbicide and water, and on land, a large area had been sprayed with herbicides. Again, volunteers were out in the water cutting to drown, 33 for 41 days for 300 hours. After spraying, some of the biomass was cut and late in the season, and some of it was could be burned safely at that point, which would remove the biomass and make it easier for spraying next year, and also would allow native plants to start to germinate the following year. Next slide, please. So in 2023, we were struck by the dramatic reduction in Phragmites, both on land and in water. And it was sort of, when we did our first survey in the early summer, the top slide on the left kind of showed it was looking kind of brown because all that had been there before was Phragmites. But the optimistic view was to say that on the left-hand side, the top view was of a channel we called Paul's Channel, and that was in 2023 after the spraying. Below it, or excuse me, yeah, below it in 2021 is Paul's Channel with 3 truxers in it, and it took 3 days to cut the frag and remove the biomass that year with 3 truxers. So we now had an area that the Phragmites was gone, and we're waiting for regrowth. Control efforts were herbicide in the water too in 2023, and this year a nifty gadget was worked up to attach to the front of the truxer, where the herbicide could sort of be whipped on to the stands of Phragmites as they drove through it. So that was working really well in the sparse regrowth of Phragmites. And but the bulk of the work was done by backpack spraying on the shoreline. Next slide, please. So the spring of 2024 was warm, and there'd been quite a bit of rain. And so during the survey in June, we saw a very different thing. The slides on the left are showing, the pictures on the left are showing the gut area. So along the shore, the banks of the gut was showing the flowers were just blooming prolifically. And in the water, you can see the area of the gut, which had become so narrowed in the past, was now open with healthy bulrushes. So that was fantastic. We still found some Phragmites in water on the surveys. We were seeing still some live rhizomes at the edge of the water, which is at the lower left. You can see those white rhizomes show that they're alive because they go black when they're dead and they're sprouting. So they were still there along the edge of the water. And the upper picture shows a long floating stolon, which is a floating stalk of Phragmites with roots sprouting, and that was 6 feet long, so it was ready to break off and head off to spread. The lower right picture did show that in areas that had been sprayed, we were starting to see tiny sprouts coming back, as was talked about previously. But the seed bank is there, and with the rain and the sun, we were seeing tiny stalks there, so we were going to need to be extremely careful about monitoring those and controlling them. Next slide, please. So 2024, the bulk of the work was done by spraying on land, particularly because the water work was virtually done. Most of it was done by backpack spraying, although in the top left-hand corner, there's a picture where you'll see that tiny spot spraying was done from a handheld sprayer. You can see on the right-hand side, though, another example of the success of the work in the water. The top channel 2021 top picture shows a landowner channel, which was going into the frag at the side of the gut, going to the cottages in there. That was 2021 versus 2022, where the water was clear for the landowner to go by boat properly in to their cottages. Next slide, please. So in 2025, control on land and in water will continue as we increase, but we are going to have to increase our efforts to confirm care that it's not reintroduced to areas in the wetlands. A lot of islanders have to use ATVs and Argos to get out to their properties during low water. And you can see various tracks on the left where they've been doing just that. Last year, Nature Conservancy staff and a couple of members from our group got together with those landowners to talk about avoiding making more than one route if possible to get out to their islands, and making sure they're not going through live frag or areas where there's live stolons and rhizomes still existing. On the mainland, there's a different problem where a lot of people on Argos and ATVs are just doing donuts for fun, which is definitely potentially spreading Phragmites, but the folks on shore are helping out with controlling those guys. One more slide, please. And this last slide shows drone photos taken by a couple of our volunteers. The first one on the left is from 2021, and the one on the right is from the same bay. And you can see on the left, all down the middle is Phragmites. There had been considerable work done cutting it the year before, but that's Phragmites on the left. On the right-hand side, the Phragmites is basically all gone, so that landowners can drive their boats into the islands out there without having to go through all the Phragmites. One more slide, please. And once again, thank you from us too, to all the people that have helped us and supported us. And we're moving into our 9th year with great optimism at this point. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Leslie, and for all of your efforts as well. It's just such an amazing transformation. I'd like to point out that it was you and your group members that actually introduced me to the cane cutters and everybody else in the province. So thank you for that. It's been an amazing tool, and it's helped so many of us with our work. So it's kind of the epicenter from whence the cane cutter method came.
Yes,
Pretty cool.
that's right.
Okay, we're going to move further north up into Sundridge with Mary Lee and Karen. Welcome.
Welcome, everyone. This is a great opportunity to share information and the excellent presentations you just received. I'm sure you're going to get a lot of information. I hope you can get a few new things from us as well. Karen and I are chairs of the Phragmites Working Group Lake Bernard, and we have a committee of a group of 15. Karen, is that you in that picture on the left?
It certainly is, Marilee. I never thought in a million years that fighting frag would lead to me being a cover girl.
We're in deep now. We have on the picture on the right there is Lake Bernard. We're part of the Almaguin Highlands. There are about over 130 inland lakes, and we have a problem with frag. We have a lake that is bordered by the village of Sundridge, township of Strong, and the Jolly Creek is coming in from the north end. We won't want this horrible invasive, to get into any of the other inland lakes, all 130 plus in the Almaguin region. In 2017, we confirmed that we had Invasive Phragmites australis established and taking over our basically shallow shoreline. We organized key people and volunteers to form the Phragmites Working Group Lake Bernard. 2019, we consulted with the Invasive Phragmites Control Center, Dr. Janice Gilbert, and applied for funds to have Janice bring her John boat and boat the lake and give a presentation to our key stakeholders at the Lions Building in Sundridge. We had her develop a control plan for us, and we reached out to other frag fighters in the province. And that year we managed 8 sites, and we thought we were really doing it. Next slide, please.
So from there, we have ramped it up to 63 sites. This is just some data from last year. So keeping track of the sites that we work in, and they're in a range of different areas, predominantly around Lake Bernard, but we also have some roadside sites. And what happened in 2024 is, of the sites that we've been involved with, 9 have become owner managed. So that means that at some point along the way, we helped someone who was a landowner look at the frag that they had on their property, helped them maybe for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and last year they took on the management of that property themselves, predominantly using cane cutters. Because that works for us in our environment, and also spading to disrupt the rhizomes underneath the soil. 2 of our sites were eradicated, and that's as a result of IPCC spraying. Those were roadside sites on municipal road allowances. We have 39 sites that represent ongoing work, so that will be what we pick up in the spring. And we have 13 demonstration sites. So we classify a demonstration site as being one that is outside of the 3 municipalities that we do actual work in. And we are invited by those municipalities to come by interested people. It's predominantly private landowners or people who have noticed frag on municipal properties and they don't know what to do with it. So we would go and we would help them at a site to evaluate the characteristics of the site and to show them how to use cane cutters and spades to get busy with that work. Next slide, please.
This is the end of our presentation, but we'll jump in here. So surprises. It's a multi-year project. It's not gone yet. Managing mechanically, as has been mentioned, takes many years. It requires monitoring, determination, repeated removal efforts, many tools. We are adding biocontrol this spring. And it has been here for many years and will be here. It will take us many years to get it under control and eradicated. In the lower right picture, that's a Rhinorhizomosaurus of one. We do have fun while we're removing mechanically. And we have found that where there are people, there are problems. So we have had some interesting resistance problems. Some said that we were spreading it, that the pool noodle boom, which we've seen in the other presentations, or the fringe that we were leaving up around the stands at cutting events were to hide what we were doing rather than capture any floating bits. Some said that we were fighting a losing battle, and why bother? Some cut the stalks, displayed them in pots, put them in doorways in the fall. We stopped several from gathering them and putting them in their trunks to share with friends. A lot of education has to occur. We invite everyone to help. There is a job for everyone. All of our volunteers get a bright red t-shirt. The graphic on the front is from an Aboriginal artist, Russell Naganosh, who's a 60 scoop survivor from our community. We went to school with them, and we always celebrate at the end of our cuts, and if possible, share butter tarts or treats. There's a job for everyone. Work plan, be realistic. We review our work plan. We have the original control plan from Dr. Gilbert. We make sure that in the fall, we get together and see what worked, what didn't work, where we are, where we have to go. We're looking at our different sites. We're upgrading our forms, our safety form, our waiver. We apply to the MNR for our lieu. And in the spring, we set the goals that match the funding that we've been able to secure. We have to be realistic. You have to be realistic. This isn't going to be gone in a year. Discuss it with the municipalities, get their support, do education, do displays, secure your saw operators. We use arborists. We have one who's green, using electric equipment. Write up a season report, share it widely. Get going early after the snow melts. Work together, support each other, and yes, have fun. Next slide, please. In this slide, you can see the waders, the work gloves, the bright red t-shirts that allow the arborists to see the volunteers so that they're safe. We arrive with the arborists at 7 in the morning. The volunteers come in at 8. The t-shirts with the bright red image are reminding us frequently of the wildlife we appreciate in the natural environment and that we are trying to restore the environment for. The pool little boom on the soft rope in the upper left. The soft rope was obtained very cheaply at a discount store. That pool little boom is held in place with 3 whole bricks. Thank you, Janice, for that tip. The wide fan garden rakes to rake it out of the water, the raspberry cane cutters that have been mentioned, Pelican Snow Trek 60 ice sleds that we can pull easily around to take the cut biomass to shore to put on the tarps, the free tarps. Thank you, Sandra. The trucks are from the IPCC down in the lower left. A private trailer in the bottom right. We have a lot of our volunteers, over 100 every year, who assist. In this particular circumstance, the volunteer hauled it away in the leaf litter bags and the tied bundles. We use baling twine to tie the bundles and a tarp over top, as has been mentioned, when the plumes are out, because we don't want to spread any more on our lake. And volunteers. We do a neighbor helping neighbor model. We get our assessments done early in the spring. We have signed permission forms from owners, and we bring everyone that has any kind of a skill set in to help us. And I can't wait to see how much is reduced, perhaps eliminated this season. We have the IPCC 2 days in the summer, and we have had on 2 particularly tricky areas, our dam, which leads downstream to other inland lakes, and the West End stands, where we had 1.3 acre and 0.9 acre stands, and where it had been well established all along. We have the IPCC apply our herbicide on dryland locations. Next slide, please.
So we have a lot of information to share. We've got comprehensive annual reports that you are welcome to have a look at, lots of good pictures. Just a couple of things that we haven't mentioned. we by no means are managing every bit of frag in our 3 municipalities. We have 2 highways that run through the townships where we have mapped the frag and have lobbied our municipal councils to send letters to the Ontario government for them to manage the roadsides that run through our properties. But there's more every year that we see, but we're definitely also making gains. We don't have any before and after pictures in our presentation today, but we can certainly say that after as we're entering kind of our 8th year of work, that you can see what difference it makes to be working away at preventing the stands from getting bigger with just the help of cane cutters and volunteers. You can get a lot of work done. And we've also done a lot, I think, in our local area to help with education. So the left picture at the bottom is Marilee and a student from the Canadore Environmental Technician Program who wanted to do some volunteer work with us last spring. So she came and she helped us. We spent a whole day in a public school, a local public school, where the environmental club, the eco club, had organized presentations for the whole school body throughout the day. So that was a really, I think, a powerful way of helping the next generation to be able to identify what it is that they see in their environment and to spark some interest in volunteering. And on the right-hand side, that was with the support of the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters. We've had summer students for the last 2 years, and this was one of our summer students who did some fabulous work with us last year. As we have smaller biomass, we've upped the amount of spading that we're able to do on the lake shore to disrupt the rhizomes that are there. So we've welcomed volunteers from any community that wants to come and to learn with us. We cut twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays, and would love to welcome you to our community on Highway 124 to come and help us anytime you want, or to reach out if you want to talk further about our Near North Phragmites project. So back to Janice.
Thank you so much, Marilee and Karen. And I want to mention that not only are they dealing with Phragmites, but now they recognize another significant threat in the Japanese knotweed. And Sandra Marshall also mentioned how, working on frag has shifted them to looking at the other invasive plants. And that's just so cool that, with the formation of your community group, that you are able to look after these other problematic invasives as well. And so it's just a real testament to the strength of the community groups, the importance of the community groups. And I have to say, it's been an absolute honor to work with all of you. And we just come in for a few short days and help. You guys are the true heroes, honestly, because let's face it, without your involvement, your communities would be an absolute disaster. And you continue to put out your time and your effort and sharing of your knowledge, and just so appreciative of that. And I know there are many, many others out there listening or not even able to attend today, but without the community, without groups such as yours, the program's not going to work across the province. It just is not. And so I'm just so appreciative for all that you do. I'm also, wanted to mention, Marilee, what you said about, some of the naysayers in the community and, a little bit of pushback. And that's not uncommon. I know that those messages, why are you bothering? It's futile. I've heard that in Oliphant, and you go there now and it's like night and day. And really, when those naysayers see the results, they get quiet pretty quick. And then sometimes they actually come and start helping. So there's a way to win some folks over for sure. But that's the other part of it is just the positive spirit that you all convey. You don't convey the negative. It's always the positive, and I just think that's just a wonderful way to build the community engagement. There are some questions from folks in attendance, I believe.
Yeah, we do have a couple questions, and Janice, if you wanted to put your camera on, and any of the panelists, if you want to turn your camera on just for this final Q&A, I think that'd be great. Janice, did you want me to ask the questions? I'm happy to do that.
Sure. It says I can't turn my camera on. The host has turned it off, so I don't
Oh,
know if that's
interesting.
Emily. But you can, at least you can hear me.
Yes, we can definitely hear you. Okay, so for the first question, in terms of mapping across the multiple municipalities, what mapping platform are you using to capture this data? And is it collected by physically driving those road segments throughout those municipalities?
So I'll answer that. Yes, we use EdMaps, which is a North American mapping system. So yes, and we physically drive to the places to get the GPS location. There's a little bit involved with all of that. EdMaps is a great organization to get involved with because they do a whole bunch of free training, including office hours. Our observations we put into a spreadsheet, and then they're uploaded and verified through the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, who are the verifiers of invasive species on behalf of the province. So if you want to talk further about some practical details about how to go about doing the mapping using the EdMap system, by all means reach out to us and we can help you with that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Karen. I think Sandra, you and Nancy and others from the Lambton Shores Feminist Community Group, I think you drove around, used just paper maps and circle in the early days. I recall that's how it was done. The locations as well, correct?
Yes, yes. It was before Bill and I drove around the country roads around here. It was before we had access, I guess, to those programs. And so we initially, even within Port Franks, it was just eyeballing it. And yeah. And just one other idea, I think of, I can't remember her name, from Dutton Dunworth, Janice.
Oh, Dutton, yeah, Dutton.
And
yeah.
she had a really creative way of getting mapping done. Most of the kids or students in that area were school bused. And so she, for community hours, I think they put this towards community hours, the kids were riding all the back roads. And so they took that on as a project and they were mapping. You have to be creative.
Those retired school teachers, they're pretty great. We have a few here today as well. Yeah, there's a number of different methods. I believe some of the mapping information is going to come up during the Phragmites action session as well. Some of the tools there that are available.
The other point there is that when we first did the mapping, we had Karen Alexander from the Coastal Center doing some mapping from Sarnia right up to Tobermory. She was doing the shoreline. And then the municipality had a summer student who was doing some mapping. And when we put all of that together, that was what we used in the initially.
Yeah, and I did the shoreline for the wetlands section. Yeah, so it was really nice to have all those pieces to put together in the management plan. Absolutely, no question. Yeah.
Great. All right. The next question is a little longer, but I'll try and paraphrase a little bit if I can. Has the idea of creating full integrated pest management plans, or IPM, either broadly or for specific sites like stormwater ponds, been considered as a tool for landowners, municipalities, and similar stakeholders? For reference, IPM plans build in best management practices by establishing specific thresholds such as aesthetic, economic, environmental, or economic injury levels that guide decision making. These thresholds help landowners and managers determine when and how to implement cultural, mechanical, chemical, or other control methods. They also reinforce the importance of sustained long-term monitoring and management. It's a big one.
I'll just quickly jump in and say that the control plan that we started with was sort of a mini integrated pest management plan for us, because this was all new to us. And when we started, of course, aqua habitat wasn't in the game yet. There wasn't biocontrol, and we were new. So we did have a mini plan, perhaps not as comprehensive as the ones that are available across the province should we get to that point. And certainly what we're doing now with having the growth with the Phragmites funding and the various areas, and working towards having more information on best practices and sessions such as this, we're heading in the right direction. Looking at what the experts presented ahead of our little presentation, you guys are the leaders, and certainly we've learned huge amounts from you. But having all of that pulled together in a plan for a specific region, oh, that would be wonderful, including all the players, MTO, MNR, and so on, because we know frag doesn't go by boundaries.
Yeah.
No, and that's a problem always.
And that's one thing that Nancy and Bill could comment on. We have just formed the Lambton County Phragmites Working Group, where we're expanding and getting everybody, instead of the silo effect, we're getting everybody on board, and hopefully we'll get the drain superintendents and the roadside superintendents and everybody working together rather than isolated. And Nancy, I think you've seen some really positive strides with the formation of that group.
Yes, there has been. Yeah.
The only thing that I would add to that, coming from a sort of that rural municipality and diverse, small but diverse population, is that while the experts may develop the plan, it doesn't mean that local people embrace the plan. And that's important to keep in mind, that there's more than one approach, and you may not get to the quickest, easiest in terms of amount of volunteer time and physical effort solution, but that shouldn't stop anybody from getting started, because it sometimes is very interesting who pulls up to ask you what you're up to. And every little opportunity to provide perspective, I think it adds together. And we can't, I know that Marilee and I certainly believe that we cannot be seen as stopping, because we have people who don't support, or quite frankly, sometimes stand in the way of moving forward with the full implementation of an integrated pest management plan.
My sort of approach was lead by example, because we used to be out cutting beside the gut there, and all the boaters would go by and laugh for a lot. And they were talking about us cutting grass. Why are you cutting grass out there in the water up to your neck? But it's like Janice said, it would come around, and especially if you the folks that donated the barges, he was on the municipality. He was a counselor, and his son then, who's only 23, became one of, he ran the Mini-X, the backhoe, and then he went to university and did a paper on controlling Phragmites, which was in his business course, but he chose Phragmites. So, and we also had kayakers that would come every year. They'd come by and they'd say, hey, we've been coming every year, this looks better. And during COVID, we could work all the way through. So there were kayakers from Europe and everywhere that had been stuck in Canada that were kayaking through the Frag. And we get a lot of bird watchers. And so that it's correct. We educate our people doing the work in person. And when Janice is there, she gives us demos on little extra techniques. So it's surprising how quickly it spreads and how quickly the naysayers kind of, like Janice said, they may not compliment you, but they stop grumbling. So that's good. So.
You know, I also think that having the plan, we initially, our first plan was done in 2000 and, Jan, 11 or 12, 14, I can't remember, maybe 13 or 14. It was approved by council. And a couple of years ago, we revisited it, and Janice updated it with all of the different methods now. And my comment to this would be that having the management plan, we can refer to it when we are trying to engage people, because the first management plan, it was broken down into different PMAs. I think they were 7 in our municipality, and each one of those, if you looked at the management plan, went into some detail about what would be recommended. So if we had people questioning, we could at that point in time refer them to that management plan to take a look, so that they realized that we were serious and that we had consulted with people in the know. And just as others have commented, when they started seeing the success, because our program goes from Grand Bend, we didn't even talk about that, but Grand Bend right down to the southern border, which is the Townsend line. It's a huge area. But when people saw the success, then they became interested, and the plan became a resource that they could go to, because it included it includes the best management practices, as well as breaking the municipality down into certain areas.
We did a delegation once a year to the council and mayor too, to keep them updated. But we also had them come out for a boat tour on a pontoon boat each year to go around. And the first year when we went out, we literally we started off and we just literally drove the pontoon boat into Frag and got it stuck on purpose. And that's when the mayor just went, holy smoke. She had never been to Alphen, and she had no idea about the Frag. So that was good to bring and Bruce Power sent their CEO up to see the project, and Janice let him drive a truckster. So that was good too. That worked out. So.
Could I just add to Nancy's comments as well? We've got a tremendous municipality that have supported us for well over a decade, and they've done a great job. But just to give you an example of communications and silos and all of that, the people in charge of mowing the roadsides, we've talked to them many times over the years. Leave it, let it grow, let it be sprayed, let it translocate the herbicide to the roots. But almost invariably, they want to get out and cut those roadsides. So quite often it happens a week or two before the planned spraying occurs. So it's constant education. It's not malicious on their part. It's lack of information being shared by departments within really quite small municipal governments. But the idea of an IPM is a lofty goal, and it would be wonderful to have, but I think we really have to work these by municipality, work them up, develop our own, which I think our management plan is like an IPM. Maybe not as fully fleshed out as the consultants would do it, but it covers all of the basics and deals with the areas that need to be controlled. And then it's just continuous communications. And we're lucky that we have Nancy, who's a tremendous communicator with the municipal people and all of the county people as well. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thanks for all of your really wise words. Like, I wish we could have this whole day session just chatting with you. There's so much more information that you can provide. I know this, like you should each have like a day, but anyway, we don't have it, unfortunately. And Gabby, I think there's more questions in the Q&A, but we can't do them right now. Is that correct?
That's right. There's just a couple more questions, but just so that people have time to eat lunch, I think we'll send people to lunch, but we will follow up with those who have those questions in the Q&A over email if we can, and answer those. So thanks for your questions. Appreciate it.
And thank you all to awesome fraggers for all that you do, all your volunteer efforts, all you've done actually to help forward these initiatives throughout the province, sharing your information. It's extremely invaluable, even for folks that have been doing this a long time as well. But certainly I hope for those folks just getting started that you provided some inspiration. I know that you would be more than willing to assist anybody with getting their group started. So thank you very, very much.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thanks, everyone. We'll send it to lunch now.